Welcome, everyone, to our legacy author interview with the fabulous Jill McPherson, the author of From Control to Connection, How Nonviolent Communication Helped Me Fall in Love with Teaching Again. What a great title. And it's going to be the title of your webinar next week, too. So just wonderful stuff. And we're also hungry for it. Jill, it's so good to have you with us so we can catch up on everything you're doing.
Great. Thanks for having me.
The way you started the article was intriguing. And I know it's exactly the when you first shared your story with me, it's the way you started it. It's that the inner conflict of classroom management starts driving everything in our work. And until you catch yourself and say, wait a minute, this isn't even what I believe in. And it certainly isn't serving me well or my students well. It kind of eats you up. So
Mhm.
talk more about that. Talk about that moment where you finally just hit the wall and said, something's going to change. I can't just keep doing this. It's just power and control, and it's not going well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you asked like the moment. I feel like there were so many moments, and it's
Yeah,
in which ones do I pick, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I think the most ones that they stand out the most is those moments with children who are having, drastic meltdowns, and fits, and then how adults responded to it. Really from a like this can't happen. This child's broken. We need to fix them.
right.
And one moment that really stands out in my mind is at the last school I was at. There was a child who was having frequent meltdowns, and he was only maybe in grade 3 at the time. And at one point, they called the police and the police to come in to deal with this child. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, because he was, it was like removing him from the room, screaming, and then, sort of this room of isolation, still screaming,
Yeah,
then getting physical. And then it was like the admin decided they were going to call the cops. And I was just witnessing this tragedy and just
yeah.
thought there's got to be a better way.
Amazing. And you tell it like it is. You go straight to defining it as punitive justice, that we're so busy punishing
Yeah.
that we never get to actually helping children sort through their own feelings and find healthier ways to cope.
Yeah, and I think, just to elaborate a bit more, I think, and I don't want to vilify anybody.
No.
When I look back at that scenario, everybody was doing the best they could with what they had. And what they had was a frame of what's wrong with this child and a frame of like, there's something here for us to fix. And where my frame, when I witnessed the whole thing, was the tragedy of this child is trying to communicate with us and no one's listening.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what they're telling you.
Yeah,
Somebody
yeah.
listen.
And when we don't listen, whether we're 8 or 58, doesn't matter, anywhere in between and beyond, is then we just amplify our strategies when people don't listen.
Yeah.
Um, and, and we all know those moments where we just lost it. And losing moments is when we don't feel seen and heard. And we just keep up in the ante, and things just keep getting more and more drastic, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. And this was the best this child could do,
Yeah.
to try to be heard, and still is not heard.
You make me think. Um, my frame of reference going back into the 80s was Howard Gardner and multiple intelligences. And back then we talked about the deficit model of how we look at students. You're saying that same thing, but in a kind of social emotional way. That instead of talking about intelligence, the industrial age solution to everything was to fill it up. Everything's a vessel, fill it up, and we have
Mhm.
the answers, and we need to correct things and make everybody come out the standardized way. And of course, in
Yes.
2025, the world is flipped, and now we know that's absolutely not the way to work with people and children in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. The word standardize is such a tragedy, right? Like,
Yeah,
of like, let's make everybody the same.
right,
Let's make little like factory robots,
right.
and that can, input, output, instead of what can we do to foster to bring the best out in all children.
Does more harm than good, really.
Oh, for
So you
sure.
you reference in the article that you were sitting, I'll say in the teacher's lounge, I don't remember specifically, and you overheard teachers talking about NVC, nonviolent communication, and they kind of introduced you to it and handed you some things to listen to. And Can you tell, as much as you're comfortable divulging, can you tell me more about who that teacher was and that moment when you finally discovered Marshall Rosenberg?
Yeah. And it's funny because I always describe this moment as that, nonviolent communication found me. And the reason why is because this is just my belief. Some people take it or leave it, but the whole ask and you shall receive. And I, had been plagued for a while, for several years, where I was like, "There's got to be a better way," and so I kept, like, sort of putting it out there, like, I've got to find this better way of doing it. And then the way it actually happened was, um, when I was in the staff room, I was supporting a colleague who was struggling with a child, and I experienced that this colleague was really, negatively judging a child, that they should be able to behave better.
Yeah,
And so I just got compassionately curious and just offered some empathy around, like, trying to understand, and I didn't even really realize it myself, but, like, that this child was doing the best they could. And I was trying to not make excuses for the behavior, but to understand the behavior. And as I was languaging it this way, and my friend Susan was was sitting there, and she goes, "Oh, Jill, are you trained in VC?" And I said, "What is that?" And so she told me she'd taken this course, and that was a few years prior. So it was, before online stuff. So she had this um, binder, and it was filled with CDs, six
no,
CDs and
right,
notes. And she said, "Here," and she handed it to me later, and she's like, "I took this course. I think this really interests you." And so I took the binder, and literally that night, is like, went to the parking lot, pulled it out, put the first CD in my vehicle, and started hearing Marshall Rosenberg talk.
yeah,
And, like, almost tears came to my eyes of, like, this is what I've been wanting to find, and I just didn't know it was possible.
uh,
And so then I just ate it up, and I listened to it multiple times. And then there's so much on YouTube of
mm,
Marshall. Thank goodness they recorded so much of him. And again, most of those videos on YouTube I've listened multiple times, because it took a long time to just um, have a grab and what he was really teaching, because there's so much internal programming in what he referred to as, we're all educated in something called dominant culture paradigms, and where we are, educated to keep the hierarchies in place, where people
yes,
have power over, and we have many beliefs, whether we're not even really conscious of, because of course most of us are walking around with belief systems that we never chose. And
right,
so and so it's becoming aware of the belief systems that we are navigating from, that we have not chosen and never questioned. And so it started to, I had to start doing all my, mental inventory of, like, oh, and noticing how much of the behaviors that I didn't enjoy in my students, how much I was fueling that
yeah,
through my belief systems, that was supporting behavior that was triggering children, that was making problems that then I had to address.
right,
Right. So I started to see the cycle that we were all trapped in
yes,
innocently, students and children, right? They were following their belief systems of what they needed to do to survive institutional education. And, I was following mine as, like, the higher authority as the teacher, trying to put everybody into place and demand respect instead of earn it.
right,
Right? Huge. It's exhausting to demand respect.
yes.
It requires a punitive system to do that. But when you're earning respect, then there's no effort required.
Well, and you you make such a good point of this in the article that, you know, the shift is taking no as honesty, receiving the honesty of that no instead of rejection, because those deeply rooted paradigms you're referring to, and they're so ingrained in us. Just teasing that out and separating yourself from what you were given as values and cultural understandings, to be able to have a child tell you no and not take it as, well, I'm going to show you yes, and you're going to do it my way, is a huge shift and difficult for many adults.
Yeah. And it's so a layer too, right? Because there's the first awareness of why we respond that way when a child says no. The belief that at some level, I trump you. My needs trump yours
Right.
because I'm in a position of higher authority. And this is the dance we call respect. And, but it's not at all. We just label it that way and
Yep.
trick ourselves in thinking that this is what respect is. And and so there's first that layer of conscious awareness of, oh, right, I'm attached to a belief that we are responsible for each other's pain and that we're responsible for each other's painful emotions, and so therefore we blame each other and try to change each other's behavior so we can feel better. And so there's that conscious awareness, and then there's the real deep cellular level of shifting it so that even though I soon became aware that I did not want to participate in the belief that somebody can hurt my feelings, that my painful emotion is about my internal landscape and how I'm interpreting my external world, um, and freeing myself of being a victim to somebody else's behavior. And so I had that conscious awareness, but it was years of still dealing with, a child saying X or Y and me being triggered and interrupting at a cellular level, really, my,
Yeah.
default setting of like, okay, there needs to be a consequence here,
Right.
you know, and really interrupting that and reframing of like, oh, okay, so this child is using a strategy to get a need met, a strategy I'm not enjoying, and I can fight with their strategy and punish it and
Yep.
try to control behavior,
Yeah.
or I can meet them at the level of need. What need are they trying to get met? And then everything changed because now the strategy is no longer needed. So I don't punish the strategy. I just deal with the need and the strategy leaves.
The beautiful thing. And I mean, as you describe it, and as we read it in the article, it's such common sense. There are just so many ahas where you're like, well, yeah, of course, this makes perfect sense. But we're so
Mhm.
indoctrinated that until you make the point of thinking about it on a conscious level, and to that point, you say it gave you the tools to guide students through conflict. That moment when conflict shifts from blame to shared understanding. And you give some great examples in the article.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that was too like, I mean, when teachers talk about how depleting the job is, like I think back to like when I was, in teachers college, like why was I there? Because I loved kids and I wanted to teach. Little did I know that actually the job of teaching would, I don't know, maybe be 50% of the job. I don't even know if it's that much
Right.
because it's so many other things. And so I remember being, naively disappointed over like, what? There's this and this. And of course, probably most teachers listening would say, discipline behavior is the most draining part of the job.
Yeah.
And so when I realized that, as educators, we are constantly punishing children
Yeah.
for not having skills that we never taught them.
Yep.
And why did we never teach them? Because we don't have them.
Right.
We don't have communication skills either. We think we do. And when, the more training I've done, the more I'm like, wow, it's so so tragic that, how much we don't know. And not having the training in communication is really, contributing to all this burnout. And never before have we needed it historically because, I mean, let's face it, a generation ago, um, this whole domination culture gig worked for the most part. I mean, I don't know
Right.
about you, Walter, but when I was a student,
Yeah.
I valued love and approval through compliance and conformity,
Yep.
right? Like if a teacher was like, "Oh, good, Jill," like I would do whatever you want me to stand on my head, I'll do it,
Yep.
just to get your love and approval. We
Yeah.
have a generation of children who are not buying into that gig, who are
Right.
like, I will fight for self agency and choice, and if it
Yeah.
means you're going to send me to the office, then send me.
Right.
And and unfortunately many people are interpreting this as, oh my god, like the sky is falling, like this is terrible. and and what I say is, hallelujah, we have, I know it's painful, and so I don't want to minimize the pain of this
No.
transitional time. It's
Yeah.
very painful for all of us. And yet, just like, when you renovate your house, destruction, messy, it always gets worse before it gets better.
Yes.
And my interpretation of where we are in education right now is we're in the process of a huge renovation. And we
Yes.
can like try to keep functioning from the old way. But you know what? The floor's rotting, the roof's leaking. Like it's going to get worse if we don't start renovating. And what is that renovation? Doing like what, Star Saxteen does. Let's revamp assessment because that's a
Right.
huge part of why education is failing our children and
Yes.
us out. And the communication part is another, the frame in which we see and interpret each other, the roles and how we interpret our roles.
Yeah.
Are we like dictators of information, or
Right.
are we, gardeners of creativity and
Wow.
problem solving, you
I
know?
love that. You give such human examples, and the way you use your words just it makes you want to open up and say yes to all of this, because our initial response, honestly, based on the way you described how we grew up in classrooms, is to be defensive about all this. But you say things in such generative, open ways that it just makes it easy to think it through and say yes to
Yeah.
these things.
Well, and thank you. And I think what I really want educators to hear me say is in no way am I here to point fingers and to blame.
No.
You know, we absolutely have all done the best we could with what we have, and myself included. And until
Yeah.
I found NVC, I was still a loving, compassionate teacher using
Sure.
dysfunctional, disconnecting strategies.
Right.
Right. So, and I experience most teachers are there because they love kids, they're trying to make a difference,
Yeah.
and they're compromised in doing so because of their lack of self-awareness and skills that, are contributing to the disconnection instead of the connection.
It's
Yeah, so
true.
it's really important to me to get message out to educators to like, this is what we need for our, this education reform that whether people realize it or not, we're heading into. Because
It's
if we
happening.
don't, that
Yeah.
this system is crumbling. And so,
Yes,
and teachers are walking away from the system. We're not going to get
they
anyone
are.
who wants to be educators
No.
in this system. Right. So, and going back to the old way is not working either. Some
No.
people think it's like get heavier, zero tolerance. You know,
Right.
that's only creating more problems and more pain and suffering for
Yeah.
everybody in the education community.
It's so true. And as much as this message is so profoundly timely and important for educators, even as adults, this is liberating in our adult relationships, in our personal relationships, in our professional relationships, to be able to relate to other people, listening and being sensitive to what they're actually trying to show us and tell us about what they need, really opens up all kinds of new possibilities for relationships that we may have been carrying on for years and just never hit the full potential.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a game changer in my role as a mom. Getting through the teen years with 4 kids
Yeah.
has been, has been a joy because now I've
Wow.
been able to really interrupt the authoritarian, power over structure that so
Yeah.
many parents are struggling with, particularly in the teen years, because they
Yes.
believe that their needs and their life experience trumps their children's,
Right.
and they're really upset when a child doesn't comply and conform. And so, I do parenting workshops as well, and I especially with teens, and I
Yeah.
parents of teens, and really helping them uh, interrupt what they're doing that many of them said I promised when I was a teenager I would never say or do this to my kids, and they are doing it because you don't know anything else. We parent the way we were parented unless we choose otherwise. We teach the way we were taught unless we choose otherwise.
Amen.
We are the romantic partner that we saw our parents be
Right.
unless we choose otherwise.
Yes.
Right. So nonviolent communication is about relationship, human relationships. So this is hugely impactful in all areas. I'm now teaching in corporate, and when I, teach, managers in corporations, you
Yeah.
know, I I point out to them, you're not just learning that this isn't a game changer at work. This is going to hugely impact your home life, your
Yeah.
romantic relationships, your
Yeah.
friendships, your
Yeah.
neighborhood relation, the difficult neighbor who you want to have a conversation with, but you can't because you're trying to avoid conflict.
Right.
It's a complete reframe. And even, I can with conflict. Like how many people are walking around with the belief that conflict is bad? And
Yeah.
what I educate people in, and what I when I was teaching, what I would educate my students in, is
Yeah.
to interrupt that belief system and of conflict is bad. And kids would come in from recess and there'd be a fight because someone stole someone's ball and blah blah. And I'd be like, "Do I hear conflict? Is this a conflict?" And they'd be
Right.
like, "Yeah." And then I'd be like, "Oh, great. Conflict is," and they go, "an opportunity for connection."
Right.
And 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 so like everything would stop because I can't, what am I going to teach children when there's like this upset in the room? And even if there's only two children in conflict, it contaminates the whole room. Every teacher knows that. It just spreads like wildfire. And so, we would just stop and I would walk them through this whole like, okay, so conflict, no, nothing's gone wrong here. There's nobody bad. It was, there's a breakdown in communication,
Yep.
and my job is not to listen to stories and decide who's innocent and who's guilty, who's right and who's wrong, who needs punished, whose parent needs called, who's going to stay in at recess, who's going to, who's going to apologize, forced apologies. Oh, so painful. And
Yeah.
so, all that dysfunctional thing. No, my job is a facilitator in reconnection.
Wow. Game
I'm
changer.
not, I'm
Yeah.
not a cop. And
Yep.
how many times have people like teachers gone like the worst part of being a teacher is being the cop?
Yep.
Right? I am not a cop anymore. I've finally could free myself of that.
Yes. Yes.
I'm like, no, I'm not going to be a cop anymore. My job is a facilitator in communication. So I walk them through the process, and this is what I teach educators, how to do,
Yeah.
and then they could start doing it themselves as well. But just offering them this whole reframe that led them to connection without any apologies, with
Exactly.
especially without forced apologies.
Yes.
So yeah.
That's fantastic. Um, I'm so glad we're having this interview. I'm so glad readers are going to get to know you better. Yeah, yeah, a year ago, I guess this time last year, you left the classroom and
Mhm.
started working with educators and, as you said, organizations around the country, around the world. And last, I want to say November, you had the opportunity to go to Kenya
Yes.
and visit and work with people there. Tell us about that trip.
Yeah. Yeah, it was lovely. So a friend of mine founded a school in
Yeah,
Kenya
yeah,
um, it started off, for women with who are mining gems, and this individual recognized that um, had a background in gemology and realized that these women were kind of getting ripped off because they didn't know the value of their own gems, and dealers were ripping them off.
wow.
So now they have this opportunity to get educated about the value and also finish them themselves for jewelry. Um,
Uh-huh.
so anyway, I was so thrilled to hear about this. So then I said, what could I do to help empower them too? And
Yeah,
maybe I could and offer some communication skills.
yeah,
And so that's exactly what ended up happening. I wanted to go to Africa, personally for travel anyway. So I thought, well, this is great. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to combine international travel and teaching.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I spent a week with them, and it ended up being more than just the women because the school is literally a standalone building within a vocational school. So there's lots of different buildings kind of going there. And so, as part of the rent, um, then the principal at that vocational school said, okay, well, if this woman from Canada is coming to teach, then it should be open to anybody in the school. And of
Yeah.
course, they're in partnership with them. So, yes, of course. So then I did end up having some men join us as well, which I really enjoyed because we worked through so many of the frames of the beliefs that disconnect us, particularly male and female.
Yeah.
And in Kenya right now, because technology is really starting to seep in,
Mm.
there are people now with phones, they have access to social media, you
Yeah.
know their paradigms are getting blown out of the water of like, oh, you mean women get to do this and that, and so they're going through a shift. And so helping them to not only about communicate with each other and self-advocate and just really hearing one another. And
Yes.
one of the women even went home after the first night and said to her son, "Oh, I learned how to listen today." and
Wow.
and the son went, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, I learned how to listen. Just tell me anything, and I'll show you." And
Yeah.
they end up having a very connecting conversation, and I was like, wow.
Amazing.
Margaret, there's lots of people who can't do this after many
Right.
many trainings. They still can't do this, and she had the capacity to implement it, quite quickly. So
Yeah,
yeah, so it was quite a lovely experience.
that's wonderful. Now, not everyone will know this, but you live outside of Toronto and you and your family run a farm. So
Hmm.
share a little about that as we kind of finish up. Share some of that about yourself. What's life like in the farm? What is life in the summer and coming up into the fall on the farm? How is that part of who Jill is?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is definitely a busy time of year.
Yeah,
We're trying to get hay off the field, and
yeah,
we actually most of the hay that we produce here go to farmers in Florida. So those trucks that come up with produce, instead of going back
huh.
empty, they get filled up with hay and
Wow.
and head back. But it's been challenging because we need at least 3 full days of sun with no chance of rain when we cut, and our weather has been really, Mother Nature's having a lot of emotions going on because
Yes.
it's really changeable. So it's been hard, and even the forecast is rarely correct. So there's times where we should have cut, and then we missed an opportunity because it didn't
Yeah,
rain after all. But anyway, it's constantly busy,
yeah,
and it's fun though, where our two youngest children are home with this summer with helping, and our daughter's boyfriend, and because we're also building a big implement shed and shop, and
yeah,
so there's endless construction jobs between field work, and so it's a busy place, and it's feeding a gang, and it's it's
yeah.
finding time for my clients, workshops, travel, and supporting the farming operation, and lots of field work too. So I mean, sorry, yard work for me. I have a huge yard, but I it's therapeutic, so I don't want to complain too much about playing in the dirt.
No. Well, it's another wonderful facet of who you are. And I just can't say, this has been your first year doing the work, getting out there and spreading the message on NBC, being kind of an evangelist, if you will, for how this can change people's lives. And it's been a wonderful year. And I've been honored to be a part of following you
Mhm.
and celebrating you and amplifying that message because I don't think there's been a better time for this to become a message that everyone needs to hear.
Oh yeah, and just the how my heart is so full whenever I do a workshop, whether it's educators or for corporate, and just seeing the light bulb moments go off, and sort of referred to your comment back there of like, wow, like this almost feels like common sense, and for me,
Yeah,
like, you know it's not, I wouldn't like title it common sense. For me, what happens is that we all start to connect to the
yeah.
to the part of us inside that connects us all, and the language that connects us all, that
Yeah.
unfortunately domination culture paradigms have covered up. And so it's like what I share, it helps people to sort of release that heavy cloak that helps us then to access what connects us all. And so the belief systems and the language that creates this powerful connection. So yeah,
It is
like,
so true.
yeah.
And
A lot of
and
times my workshops can get quite emotional too, as people have a lot of tears as the relations can be quite moving.
I can
Yeah.
only imagine because there's so many things we need to examine before we can move forward. So I can only imagine, and it's such good work and important work. If you're listening to this, next Wednesday, July 23rd at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, we're doing We're the Incubator on how to fall in love with your job again, find out what's really at the core of your challenges and what to do about it with this amazing educator and teacher and leader. And honestly, above everything else, Jill, you walk the walk. So you model it for us and do it with such grace and class. And can't thank you enough. Keep up the good work, and looking forward to continuing to celebrate you and promote you and introduce you to more educators.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Walter. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to our webinar next week.